AHTV and friends on a Sunday evening for a change, or Sunday afternoon if you're in America. I've got some great guests. I've got Charlie Walsh with me.
Hello, how are you?
And I've got Selly with me. Hi, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
We do have another guest coming. He's running a couple of minutes late. I've been in touch with him. And, speak of the devil. And there he is. Hi, Andy.
How you doing? You all right?
Yes, good, thank you. I was just doing the introductions. You haven't missed anything.
No.
We've only been live for a short while. So, Andy, hi.
Hello.
From Hammers United.
Correct, yeah.
Yes. Now, this show tonight was going to be a positive, fun look at the start of the season, our hopes and our aspirations. And look what's happened over the last couple of days. And it's all gone to rat shit. And I think we've got to talk about it. So who wants to start talking about Diangana, the elephant in the room?
Well, I think one thing I'll say on that, not specifically too much towards Diangana, but in relevance to it, I think yesterday watching that game, it was kind of evident that it was frustrating, but also to be expected, how the team performed. Because I think, with everything going on, with how visibly upset, at least through social media, that most of the players were about the departure of Diangana, you can see that there wasn't too much emphasis for them to want to get on that field and play. However, the opposite side of that is, the one thing that these players can control is what happens on the pitch. So it was really frustrating to see that we got turned over by a team that we dominated earlier last year, especially now that they're in the championship. And, that's just not a team that we should lose to. Granted, it's preseason, it's whatever. Betway Cup doesn't really mean anything. But at the same time, I hope that it was just like a one-game kind of pout sort of thing, and that next week when it's Newcastle, even, they're signing new players as we were just discussing. It's just frustrating, and the board doesn't seem to be backing the team. They seem to have one foot out the door. There's just a lot of frustration around the team, but hopefully they can control what they control on the field and just take their frustrations out on the opponents.
Andy, Silly used an interesting point there that I've just made a note. One game pout. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that that's a worrying sign of things to come?
I think it's important that we don't read too much into pre-season. So I think a lot of the time you can see a team have a fantastic pre-season and then have a terrible start to the season, or vice versa, have a terrible pre-season and out of nowhere start really well. But I think it will be really interesting to see what happens come the Newcastle game on Saturday. And if there is a divide and if there is a disconnect between the players and the ownership at the club, I think that's I think that's quite a serious thing. I think that's I can't think of many examples off the top of my head where current players, let alone the captain of the team, have come out and kind of metaphorically planted a flag in a camp, so to speak, that is anti-board. I think that's quite an astonishing thing to do, and if it is indicative of a feeling around a team, then I just don't see how there's any way back for the ownership from that.
That's a good point. That is a very good point, Charlie. What do you think, mate?
Yeah, I broadly agree. I think it's where David Moyes earns his money. When you listen to players who've played underneath Jose Mourinho, for example, or even people who just talk about Jose Mourinho when they talk about him, it's this idea of like an us versus them mentality. And making it a sort of siege, like you're under siege in a war. You're all sat there and you have to fight for your life, sort of thing. And that's why you get players playing better than they actually are underneath someone like Jose. and some who don't because they just don't have the mentality for that sort of thing. And that's the thing, is in this situation, this is where David Moyes needs to step up and be like, okay, right, we can all hate those people above us if we want, that's fine. But when we're on that pitch, we need to be 100% concentrated on the game. We need to be 100% putting it all out there and leaving everything on that pitch. We can't walk away and go, oh, I could have tried a bit harder, I was a bit distracted by this. We have to put it out there. And that's where a good manager comes into play. That's what he's here for. That's what he's employed for. And it's very difficult because both times he's been at the club, obviously, there's been huge disrest, huge unrest amongst both the fan base and with certain players and certain elements. And so it's really difficult, but it's where, you know, if he ever wanted a difficult situation to prove himself as being a top manager again, this is the one to do it. He can come out smelling of roses if he does this. But yeah, it's difficult. And I think, as Andy just mentioned there as well, I tend not to read into performances in pre-season too much. When it comes down to like the actual tactics and stuff, I'm not super happy with it, but you know, it is what it is.
One thing I'll say too that could work in Moyes' benefit is the fact that there won't be any fans to start the season, you know, because if everything was to happen and then they walk out there, you know, probably even yesterday, but especially in the Newcastle game when you know you're going to have a packed stadium, you know, but everybody is there, you know, kind of to just give the board a jeer instead of watching the game. You know, I think that in its own can be a distraction. So I think it's a benefit that there won't be anybody there so that the team and the managers and whoever can just focus on the game itself.
Yeah, I agree. There was a very big groundswell, and I believe that GSB Out was trending at one time at number 1 and then number 2 on Twitter. And Thomas here has said that what Andy and Hammers United are doing is fantastic. But is it all about getting them out of the club now? And if it is, how are we going to get them out? It's their club, they own it. How are we as fans going to make them leave? I can't imagine how that's going to happen.
Well, I think just before I come on to that, I think it's important to pick up on something that both of the other two guys just said, which is about the team and the fans making that separation between what happens on the field and off the field. And I think, you know, Hammers United have always tried to make our position really clear that as soon as that whistle goes, you need every single member of the fan base who's in attendance at that game to be united with the team, the playing staff, the management, and everyone pulling together to try and get 3 points. So I think it is really important to make that distinction between what happens during the 90 minutes of football and then the conversations and the actions that take place away from that 90 minutes. And in a strange way, if it is an us and them situation that has been alluded to, in a strange way, that can sometimes bring you a little bit more unity and a little bit more strength in what in what you're doing on the football pitch, because nobody wants a negative situation to be the driver for a better team or a more united fan base. But in a very strange way, sometimes all being united behind one cause can allow you to actually come together and put things to one side that you'd normally be arguing about, or you'd normally have differences.
Yeah.
In a strange way, I think it has kind of strengthened our fan base and brought them together. And perhaps the same will be with that connection between the fan base and the team. If the team understand that during the 90 minutes, the fan base are 100% behind them, and the team can put that us and them thing with the board to one side during that 90 minutes, it can create quite a strong connection. But to answer your question as to how fans can actually affect change at the club, I think there's two different levels to that. So of course it is their club, so it's not as if you can sack the owners of the club, because it belongs to them. They are the majority shareholders. So to affect that change, you've got to think about it in two different realms. Now, in terms of the movement and the pressure, with the hashtag GSB out and the protests and the kind of groundswell that you talk about, I think the way to affect change in that environment is to target that movement specifically at what the owners would not want it to be targeted at. So what I mean by that is that I think we can see by their behaviour over their 10-year tenure, leads us to believe that they're quite driven by money. Okay, I think it would be a fair statement to say that they are driven by making money, and I think it would also be a fair statement to say that they are quite thick-skinned in terms of receiving criticism from fans. So I don't think it's the criticism that will necessarily cause them to sell up and go. I think they're of the opinion that, well, if somebody criticizes me and wants to give up their season ticket, there'll be somebody else that can come in and take their place and will pay their money. And they've been doing this for a long time. I think it's 27 years now, if you take into account their time at Birmingham as well. And they weren't popular at Birmingham. So I think there is a lot of frustration, but I think that criticism and aggression and anger will send them a message, but I don't think it will make them leave. I think what will make them leave is if they get to a tipping point with their, let's say, investment, where their investment in West Ham United financially gets to a point where they think, you know what, it's just not worth us being invested in this club anymore. We're not making enough money from it, and we're also damaging our future kind of business prospects. Now, you can do that directly or indirectly. So you can directly hit them in the pocket by saying, you know, we're not going to buy any more merchandise from you, or we're not going to buy our season tickets. But then you're getting into the realms of affecting people's emotional connection with a club, because people want to buy merchandise and people want to go to games. And when you've got such a broad spectrum of personality and differences across the fan base, I think to affect change with a boycott like that, you'd need a bigger backing, I think, than Hammers United have got at the minute. So then the second way you do it is indirectly. So to affect somebody's financial prospects indirectly, what you do is you try to essentially you use the media, and you can see you whenever Gold, Sullivan or Brady get worried, what they do is they peddle a positive narrative in the media. So what we've seen on Talk Sport this week was, Jim White coming out and trying to peddle a positive narrative about why West Ham fans should back the board. And if we think back to the last time that feelings were running quite high, what we had was the apology on Sky Sports, the club asking for the apology on Sky Sports. We had an article in the Evening Standard. We had Karen Brady mentioning things in her column in The Sun. And we had, I think it was Ian Abrahams interviewing David Gold, I believe, on Talk Sport. So what the club, I believe, are affected by is when a negative narrative of those individuals starts to gather pace in the media, I believe that's where they start to feel that their financial, prospect from the investment at West Ham and businesses beyond West Ham can be affected if, let's call it, brand Gold, Sullivan and Brady is damaged by negative media.
One thing that's really interesting with that too, specifically the second thing of what you were saying, is the players coming out and voicing their opinions. Somebody in the comments earlier had said that it was nice to see the players siding with the fans finally. Because you even have, Trevor Sinclair was calling people out and, retweeting what Mark Noble was saying. And I think that's a big thing too, because it's definitely one thing to have, the corporate side of things or the media side against you. But I think when you have your own players and even players that haven't played for you, but that are just so beloved by the fan base, once they start coming out and saying stuff like that, then you're definitely getting it from both sides, regardless of if the owners hear or care about what the fans say. Like once you have the former players, start speaking up against you, then it's it's probably even worse than if media were to say anything.
We've kind of searched for that for a long time at Hammers United. Actually, we've approached player after player after player, and understandably, people haven't wanted to. People haven't wanted to come out in public and speak up against the owners, because it's not a position that you necessarily would want to put yourself in as a current player or an ex-player. So I think it is a big moment. I think it is really telling once current players or ex-players start coming out and speaking in the way that they have over the last week or so.
Yeah.
Yep. Charlie, thoughts?
Basically everything just Andy and Sully have just said. I mean,
Yeah.
On the watch along the other day, I said a lot of the exact same stuff. It's like they care about two things realistically, and that's money and media attention. And the reason they care about media attention is because, like, I think they would quite happily have fan unrest if no one spoke about it ever. Like, if Sky Sports or TalkSport or whoever never picked up on it, I don't think they'd actually care, to be honest with you. And part of it is because of the way football is now. Like, we all know that TV rights are way more lucrative than fans in the stadium. We just know that's the case because that's kind of how these things have happened. And I think part of it is like, and I know everyone's looking towards that 2023 date of when the stadium comes, and I think part of it is that they've got so much riding on this deal. Like, it's such a monumental deal for the pair of them, and Brady to a lesser extent as well, that so many eyes are on. So many eyes are on. Like, if you've noticed over the past 2-3 years, no opposition fans talk about how bad the stadium deal is for the country anymore, because they're like, oh, it's not very good, is it? It's not very good for them. They're not having a good time. So they don't care. There's so many people looking in on it. It's the same reason why until 2023, they're going to continue to say they're going to pass it down to their children. I don't personally believe that. I think they will sell up and go. I don't think they are planning to hand it down to their children. But they can't admit that when there's so many people looking at them. So the big win from the other night, if you want to look at it in a positive sense, is that media outlets started to pick up on it, because that's when they affect change. Every time media outlets pick, that's when they start to panic. That's when they start to actually do things that are beneficial for the club as opposed to opposite.
And I think off the back of that as well, I think it's important for Hammers United to kind of stress that keeping the media on side is important, because a lot of people are we get a fair amount of criticism and questions. And there's a fair amount of debate over why we haven't been more perhaps more militant in some of the things that we've done. And I think whilst frustration and anger and feelings are running high, it is important not to give the media a story that they'd be just as likely to run with, which would be one of a mob or a protest or or angry scenes, because the media will report on what they think is going to get the most clicks, the most reads in the article, the best photo. They might be sympathetic to the message of Hammers United and the West Ham fans at the minute, but that's because the story at the minute is that that message is gathering pace, and it's quite a clear message, and people are coming together as a fan base and getting behind it. But if there was a protest of a more militant style and something that the media could get their teeth into on a story of that angle, I'm sure they'd be very quick to forget about the message that we're pushing and just to pick up and run with that. It's a fine balancing act, but I do think the media is going to be where the situation with the owners, in terms of going back to your original question, Steve, on how you actually affect change. I do think it's going to be won and lost in the fourth estate, as they say in the media. And I guess the second part of what I wanted to say in terms of our longer term plan at Hammers United and looking what happens. I did an interview you might have seen with Baz and Frankie where Frankie summed it up quite well, and he said his understanding of what I was saying to him was that Hammers United are also working for day one of new ownership, and I think it's very important that we, whilst backing the GSB Out campaign is fantastic and it's getting a lot of traction and it has a lot of support, it's a very simple message, and it's very clear what people want to happen at the club. I think it's important to remember that West Ham does, has a succession of kind of poor relationships with its owners. In football in general, a lot of clubs, a lot of fans at a lot of clubs would say that they have a disconnect to their club. And I think it's very important for us to work and to plan and to build for day one of new ownership so that we don't find ourselves in this position in another 5 years' time or another 10 years' time. And that's where the creation of a truly independent, and independent is the key word, the creation of a truly independent supporters board will be, we believe, what would allow the fans to have that connect with with future owners, really. And that's a construct that we have to try to put together under the current ownership, but it's a construct that we're putting together in the hope that it outlives the current ownership and it allows us to really work with, whoever the new owners are. And I guess just to finish on that point, for people who might not have followed the history of dialogue at our club, we've had two constructs previously that were club created constructs, and I think that's where they've fallen down, because I think as soon as it is a club created construct, a club table where they're saying, here's our table, we'll invite some fans to come and sit with us at this table and to discuss, that's where immediately it falls down in the eyes of the fans, and the fans don't buy into it. What Hammers United are suggesting and working hard with the FSA on is building our table first with the Football Supporters Association, with the other independent FSA affiliated groups, and then being able to say to the club, this is our table, this is who sits around that table, we are independent of you, we would now like to invite you to come and sit at our table with us. And I think that's where the trust will be brought back with the fan base.
Cool. Well, moving on a little bit, Kent put an interesting point up about people renewing season tickets, and because fans are as loyal as they come, because he can't give it up. It's a drug to him. And I'm exactly the same. I, a few days ago, renewed my season ticket. Charlie, have you renewed?
No, I decided about
you haven't
2 months ago not to.
Is that you're not going to completely? Or
No,
30%?
Not a 30% either. Not given, because I'm of the belief that I don't. It's the money thing that Andy was just talking about.
Right.
Like I would prefer not to give them money. But at the same time, I don't begrudge anyone like yourself or the person in the chat who does. But personally, no.
Andy, have you renewed?
I have, 30%. But I think
right.
It's that emotional connection I think somebody mentioned earlier, and I think that's why football finds itself in in the position that it does, because for years that emotional connection has been exploited, and for years an owner has known that pretty much no matter what they do, they are still going to get paying customers. I mean, Blackpool came very close to an empty stadium, not quite, and that's probably about as close as I've seen. But it doesn't. Football doesn't operate in the same way as any other business in the capitalist society that we live in, where a customer can choose whether they want to shop with your business or not, because you have an emotional connection to your football team. The owner of that football team knows that you will shop with that business, for want of a better phrase, pretty much unconditionally. And I just wonder if we're approaching a point where we've seen empty stadiums, and I just wonder if we're approaching a point where the bubble might burst and people might actually think, do you know what? We should look after our supporters, and we do need our supporters for this to be a viable, even if you're looking at it from a business point of view, for this to be a viable product.
Yeah, and even to kind of go forth on what you were saying about, owners see fans as, kind of everlasting customers. It's not even just one fan. You think about it, most of you guys who have been following the team, probably got it from your parents and then from their parents and so on and so forth. So I think, it's not even just, Steve, Tom, Steve, Charlie, and Andy being customers, it's, you know, your kids or your parents or so on and so forth. It's a generational thing. You know, as long as the club is around, you know, you're going to have fans, and then, you know, those fans are going to end up passing that on down to their kids, you know. That's just the nature of it, you know. So I think that's definitely one point too. But a very interesting thing about this whole situation too is, you know, as I believe Kent was saying, that it's a drug. You know, it's something that people have missed since March of this year, you know. So you know, and obviously I'm in America, I don't have season tickets, but I'd be very conflicted on giving it up too, just because, you know, I think for me and for most of you guys, you know, I know especially at Upton Park, you go to the game and you know exactly who you're going to be around. You know, you have those friendships of people that you probably only see once a week, but you know exactly how they're doing and all that stuff. But then there's always that element of the unexpected. You know, you go to a football game and you never know what you're going to see, you know, whether it's, you know, beating a top six or, you know, getting a random Andy Carroll bicycle kick or whatever. You just never know, you know. So I think that's always something cool. But, oh, you know, I was there. But, yeah, I can – it definitely is one thing that is conflicting. You know, it's like, I don't want to give money to these guys, but at the same time, I don't want to miss out on the football.
And I think that's the thing, is it's like, that's why what Andy's doing with Hammers United and everyone else outside of the actual match itself is so important. Because it's like, even me, it's like Steve, you've been on the boats, people in the chats who've been on the boats, like the amount of conversations I've had down there before a match where people go, oh, we've got to go to the stadium now. Like the actual match bit is the bit that everyone's like, oh, whatever, man. But then the rest of the time is like a great day. And it's like, if I personally, like, so I don't have a season ticket this year, I'm still planning to go to like see people, to see my friends, to go out, we'll have fun, we'll then we'll go to the protest, we'll go to this, we'll go to that. That's all still possible. And it's possible to, everyone keeps saying support the team, not the regime and all this stuff, but it's super possible. You can go into the ground like yourself or like Andy will, and if they let us eventually, and you will be able to fully support the team and get behind them for 90 minutes. And then before the game or after the game or whenever it happens to be, fully support like GSBL or Hammers United or whatever you're there for under that specific banner. Like, that is fully possible. Like, it's not one or the other, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I've renewed in full, and I intend to go into the ballot for every home game, because as much as, you know, we say we don't like the London Stadium and it's not a patch on Upton Park and everything like that, I just want to get back in amongst it on a Saturday at 3 o'clock, even if the stadium is only a quarter full. You know, I've been on the stadium tours. I've seen the stadium totally empty. So, you know, I just want to get back in and watch the football rather than just see it on TV, because this is something that Sally, have you ever been over to a game?
Yeah, I've actually been one at Upton Park and one at the London Stadium. Right.
So you'll appreciate as well where I'm coming from then. When I say, and I know there are people in America who won't appreciate what I'm going to say, but it is a completely different feel and a completely different vibe watching it live to watching it on TV. Yeah, the camera follows the ball. So the camera only sees the players that are interacting in and around the ball, unless there's like a, you know, sort of maybe a violent off the ball incident or something like that, and then they'll pan to that. But when you're in the stadium and you're watching a game, you're watching how all the players that are not actually involved with the play at the time, you see how they're moving, you see if they're talking to each other, you see whether their heads are down or up, or, you know, and what effort they're putting in and things like that. So you do actually see a completely different side to the game, I think, and it's that I enjoy, and it's that I want to get back in and see, which I think is quite a decent little segue into the coming season. And this is what I wanted to talk about from the get-go with this video. I didn't want to be talking about bloody grumping and moaning and things like that. I specifically wanted to make this video about, right, it's 6 days till the start of the season. Everything's looking positive. Everything's looking good. We've had a great pre-season. We're bringing through some youngsters. How are we going to do? Charlie, how are we going to do?
I don't know if you want to come to me if you want positivity. Okay, so here's the thing. I think Moyes' tactics, I alluded briefly to it earlier, and they don't work against teams like Bournemouth. I wasn't sure what Bournemouth were going to rock up. Was it going to be the sort of free-flowing attacking football under Howe, or how their new manager was going to set up? I don't know if it was going to be any different. And what they did is what we can't play against, which is sit deep, be organised, and then counter-attack. And then just because of the way David Moyes works, the way his system works, we just can't do that, right? It's like butting heads. Both teams doing the same thing. It just doesn't work. We can't break a team down. The positive, if you want to be positive about it, is that a lot of teams in the Premier League don't play like that. A lot of teams in the Premier League aren't the sort of sit tight defence, a counter-attack system anymore. They like to step on it. They like to take it to the opponents. And actually, they might be looking at West Ham and thinking they're a wounded animal right now. We can go and take them. And that plays into our hands. That's the reason why we did well against teams who are much better than us in terms of the positioning or whatever. And that's because they try to step to us, and actually that's when we come into our own. And that's why that opening period I'm not as concerned about as maybe some others were when it first came out, the fixture list, because I look at it and think actually those are the sort of games we can take points from. It's the ones against the teams down the bottom where I'm going to be a bit more concerned. So it's like, how are we going to do? Honestly, I don't know. In my opinion, I think it's entirely down to David Moyes. I think David Moyes can either pull an absolute worldie and we end up potentially even top half, because we do have some legitimately really, really good players, some top half easily worthy players, or he could have an absolute mare and we end up struggling quite a lot. So I honestly, I have no bloody clue, Steve, is the true answer. But conversely, I'm not as concerned about that weird run that we have that most other people are.
Sally, are you positive?
Yeah, I'm just like Charlie. I don't really know what to expect, because the past 2 years we've, had squads that should finish, and compete for European football, but then just kind of falling flat in the face. And then, I look at the table and I'm kind of struggling to see, 3 teams that are legitimately worse than we are when we don't, care. And I know there's obviously 3 teams that came up. I don't know. I don't think Leeds are going down. Fulham, I think they'll probably get relegated. And I don't know. I can't just sit here and look at 3 teams that I'm like, for sure, okay, they're going down, that we wouldn't have to worry about. But I think at the same time, just like what Charlie had said, we do have talent on the squad. And I don't think that it would be fair to say that we don't, just given current situations of not bringing anybody in, because one thing I've said in the past is essentially this same team was top 4 for the first 6-7 games last year, so they do have it in them. And like I said earlier, they have to control, what they can on the field for those 90 minutes. If they want to be a positive distraction from everything going on, with the board or transfers or whatever, that's up to them. Board's not controlling what happens on the field. Transfers aren't, well, in a way, transfers aren't controlling what happens on the field. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't think we'll finish top half, but I don't think we'll get relegated. I just don't know where we're going to sit.
Andy, how's your confidence?
I think it's probably going to depend on how we start, I would say, because when your confidence might be a little bit thin on the ground, or when you have other issues going on, let's say, it would be quite easy if we started poorly. It would be quite easy for the frustration to grow and for things to get for the waters to get a little bit muddied with all the stuff that we've been talking about. Because it'd be easy to just kind of throw the towel in and think, oh, well, everything's going wrong at the club. Look how we've started the season. It's terrible, and players start thinking about, moving away in January. But if we get a good start, and there's, we do sometimes do well against the bigger sides. We do sometimes get out some surprise results against the bigger sides. And if we do get a good start and we can separate what's going on the pitch from what's going on off the pitch, and the team do kind of pull together and maybe even close ranks a little bit, and say, look, we're playing well on the pitch. Let's just focus on that. I think our starting lineup is talented enough to get at least a mid-table finish. But then I think that's the other problem that I would throw into the mix is if we do get injuries to key players, I think we're going to really struggle. I mean, the obvious one is a striker. Antonio, I believe, went off injured against Bournemouth. And if we were to lose Haller and or Antonio, I struggle to see where goals would come from, to be honest. So I think it'll be down to the start we get, and then down to hopefully trying to keep everyone fit. But for me personally, it's a bit of a weird start to a season, because the first thing I normally do at the start of a season is look for when all the away games fall. So the first thing I'll do is think, right, have I got any midweek trips, up to like Manchester or Liverpool? Good. No, I haven't got to do any of those. Or, right, when can I get a weekend away? Have I got a weekend away in Newcastle? Or, so that's the first thing I normally do, is look for when I've got all of those away trips coming up. So it's really weird to be coming into a season and just obviously not bothered by who we play when, because chances are I probably won't be going to any of them.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to West Ham and the start of the season, I'm a bit like a dog. It doesn't matter how badly you treat a dog, it will always come back to you wagging its tail, won't it? And that is what I'm like with West Ham. The start of every season, I always go back wagging my tail. I'm always positive. We're going to set the league alight. We're going to win the cup. And then by Christmas, when it's apparent that we're fighting for relegation and we got knocked out by a League Two side out of the cup, and everybody at work's just grinning at me as I walk past, because I was giving it all 30 big ones at the start of the season. But I can't help it. That's just the way I am. I am an eternal optimist, even though I was very grumpy at the weekend, even though I was one of the 4 that went to the London Stadium yesterday. So yeah, I when it comes to the team and playing, I am quite positive, I must say.
I think
that's always one thing for the upcoming season. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
No, you go, mate. It's fine.
That's always one thing for the start of the season that I think every fan can, agree upon, is that there is that optimism of the unknown, and whether, West Ham fan, whether you're, Burnley, Sheffield, whoever, you don't know how the season's going to go. Look at, like I said, Burnley, they finished, really good, and Wolves damn near, finished in Europe. And who was that? Sheffield was even fighting for a Champions League spot, funny enough. So, you never know. We could mess around and have a season where we are fighting for, a European spot. That'd be brilliant. And this season could easily be we're fighting relegation again, and that wouldn't be nearly as fun. But, and I guess just on the optimistic side of everything, we did finish off last season in a very positive way. We won the games that were – those games that, kind of just sat in your stomach, like really nervous about, like before Watford, before Norwich, especially after losing to Tottenham and Wolves, and even Burnley for that matter, at the restart, it wasn't looking that great, but then we pulled a good string of games together. Anderson stepped up in a big way. And then even honestly, the first couple preseason games, granted, championship and League One sides, but they played well, it just wasn't bad football, I guess you could say, with the exception of the Bournemouth game. So, there is that optimism that, they do have a good start to the season, and I know we do play pretty well against the top sides. We played exceptionally well last year against Liverpool both times that we played them, almost beat them up at their place. Probably should have, but, regardless, they just have to do what they need to do, and I think that is the biggest worry is injuries. I think above all else, whether we sign anybody or not, is injuries. Because, look at what happened. We signed Souček. Dude was never hurt until he got here, and then he was injured for like a week or two, so I think that's the biggest concern. But, you never know. So we can see what happens.
Come on, get him back.
was just going to say that I think the notion of the cup competitions is an interesting one that we didn't touch on. What worries me with that is Moyes' mentality, where I think he's always prioritised and always will prioritise staying in the Premier League. And so many teams do prioritise that over a cup run. But really, if we did get a good start, and I know we never do, I know we never give the cup the proper go. But if we did get a good start, why shouldn't a team like West Ham really believe that they could do something in a cup? Although, you know, the interesting thing is, I mean, wouldn't it be typical of West Ham to get to a cup final in the year that nobody could go to it? And the only reason you really want a cup run is so that you get to go to these games and so that you get the chance of going to a cup final. So it would be typical for us to do that when you can't go.
Right, we normally about this time, Andy, we start taking a few questions from the chat, and the talk usually diverts off in a different direction. So whilst we're waiting for that to come through to the chat, because I'll take one or two before we do. Andy, let me ask you specifically a very serious question, okay? When you're at home on your own and you're building yourself or you're cooking yourself a burger, is it wrong to put mayonnaise, ketchup and mustard on the burger, or is that acceptable?
Andy, I want you to know this is really important. What you say here will define how I personally, and I'm going to say everyone in the chat, will judge you forever.
Right. Okay. Well, the first thing to say is I don't cook, so I've never been in this scenario before.
Okay.
You know, so go on, run that past me again. Let me have a little bit of thinking time.
Mayonnaise, ketchup, and mustard on a burger. I would limit it to only mayonnaise and ketchup, I think.
Correct answer, Andy. Correct answer.
I'm done.
Really?
I am done.
You've passed. Congratulations, Andy. You're now in charge of the show.
Oh,
Steve, please indicate it.
Yeah, I'm out. Hook. I've been hooked like Ben Johnson.
Yes.
Oh,
Tell me what you guys would say it would have answered then, or what?
There's only one wrong answer.
I put all three.
Right.
You're both wrong ones. Okay, so here's the problem. Here's the problem. Because Steve, right, he puts all three. And I'm telling you now, and Sally, I love you, but you're both wrong. That's just a wrong thing to do. You can't be putting all three. What are you doing? How many more condiments do you need on your burger, bro?
It all stems, Andy, from a picture that I put on Twitter. I was building a burger. The wife had cooked the burgers, homemade burgers, and I was building mine. And I squirted mayonnaise on the bottom bun and ketchup and mustard on the top bun. And Charlie has just been hating on me ever since.
It's just wrong.
Well, I'm not surprised that they do that kind of thing in America, to be honest. I mean, they're everything they do with food is to excess, isn't it?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
For someone in England to be putting all three on a burger, I just think it's not the right way to go, is it?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. I'd like to formally announce my support for Hammers United now for the rest of the time. Just if you check.
To be fair, the wife's American and she's had a bad influence on me.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah. Right, bringing it back to football. I don't want to get into a huge discussion about this. Just a couple words answer, if you'd be so kind, maybe as to what you think would happen, and as an alternative, what you would like to happen. Declan Rice, will he stay or go? And we'll start with Selly on that one, I think.
I think that he stays until, like, this is his last season at West Ham. I think, like, his last full season. If he doesn't leave by January's window, or whatever they decide is the mid-season window, I think this is his last season. no matter what happens, whether we stay up, Europe, relegation, whatever. I think this is his last season, just because there's way too much interest around him for better situations for him to stay. You know, and the thing with that too is I don't think anybody would fault him or be mad at him for leaving. You know, he's kind of given, well, not kind of, he has given everything to the club. You know, he's been pretty decent as far as his England call-ups. You know, and I know that for West Ham fans would be another way to, to support him is when he plays for England. But yeah, especially with the kind of money that's going to be thrown in his face that I know we'll never be able to pay for him, I don't see him staying longer than the end of the season, honestly.
Yeah. I think it depends on the circumstances of him going, but I think it's inevitable that he will leave West Ham. As much as I would love to see him stay, and go on and be another Mark Noble, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Andy, thoughts?
Sadly, I think he'll be gone. It could be gone this transfer window, and if not, will be gone after the season or in January. It's such a tough one because in answer to your question of what I'd like to see happen, I would love him to stay, and I would love us to build a team around him. But I don't know if that's fair on him. I just, there's nothing quite like a homegrown player. And I know that he hasn't been at the club all his life, and I know that he has got connections with Chelsea, and he might see that as a good move. But he does seem to enjoy being at West Ham. And when I play Football Manager, or when I play Championship Manager, as it was, I have like a principle of certain players that I will never sell, no matter how much money comes in for them. And I used to play like season 2000, 2001 or whatever. And the players I would never sell, no matter how much money came in for them, was one I would never sell, Joe Cole. I never sold him on any Championship Manager game I've ever played. And on Football Manager now, 2020, I would never sell Declan Rice, no matter how much money comes in for him. But in the real world, if we, the club that we are and the ambition that we seem to be showing at the minute, and probably the lack of funds available to build a team around him, I don't know if it's fair on him to force him to stay.
I agree. Charlie?
Yeah, he won't go this summer, I don't think, anymore. If he does, it will be to Man United. They're the ones I've been really concerned about the entire time anyway, because I think they actually need him, or at least to play in his role. Like Matic came into form after the restart, but he's more than past it at this point, and they do need a replacement, and Declan Rice makes perfect sense. But having said that, they seem to have their priorities elsewhere. They're looking at Jadon Sancho. They just signed Van der Beek and all this sort of stuff. So they seem to have their priorities elsewhere, and the same with Chelsea. As much as we're all scared of Chelsea, they've spent all of their money on every other position apart from there. Frank Lampard seems to see him as a centre-back, which is fair enough. If that's what he does. But they've also just signed 2 centre-backs. Obviously, Sarr's gone back out on loan, but Thiago Silva is only on a short-term contract. Thiago Silva, they signed on a free. He's got a 1-year deal with a 1-year extension, a.k.a. next summer they're going to come and try and get Declan Rice. And that makes perfect sense for them, but I don't think it's this summer. Do I think they have the money to do it? Yes, I just don't think it's their priority now they've signed those players. So yeah, I think he stays this season. I doubt a team would bid as much as we would need in January to make it happen. So I suspect it'll be next summer, but he's leaving next summer. And as Andy said, and as Sally said, and as everyone else says, that's totally fair. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love seeing him play for England. When he goes off and plays for another team, I'll be proud and say, do you know what? Fair play, go do your thing. And it's not no begrudgment or anything.
Yeah. It's just a shame as well that, given the current situation, there is a good chance that there are going to be a lot of people that don't see him play again in a West Ham shirt.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if, next summer, because he, knock on wood, he has been, one of our most consistent players as far as health is concerned. And, he does have a pretty decent strike in him from time to time. But, at the same time, there's not too many players right now at his age that have his motor, so I wouldn't be surprised if next summer, if he does stay through the season, if he isn't like top of a lot of teams, transfer boards. Like you have this amount of money, go and get them. Do what you have to do because, like I said, Chelsea, Manchester United. I think those are the two big threats for him. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see a couple other clubs like, we want you, we need you, kind of thing. Especially if he helps England go on and win what the Nations League, is that what they're in? If he helps them go on to win that. So, it'll be interesting. Plus, I won't even be surprised if people haven't come for him because teams might think that West Ham do get relegated. So they think that he'll be cheaper if that happens, which could be a huge possibility because, there's no reason for teams to not have come for him already. But, that's definitely a conspiracy on my part. But
Andy, can you see that?
I can. Yeah, I can. Is it a game changer? Good question. It's big. Yeah, I think it's very big. Is it the game changer? Possibly. Yeah, possibly. I was watching. I was watching the a live show that Knees Up Mother Brown did yesterday, and the very similar question was posted on that show off the back of Mark Noble's tweet, and they were discussing whether, following that tweet, are we now in the kind of end game as far as getting new ownership is concerned and getting rid of our current owners. And yeah, okay, if I have to answer yes or no, I say yeah, it probably is. I think it's absolutely massive that a current player and the captain has come out in this way. I think it's also massive that there hasn't been an apology, or he hasn't deleted it, or it hasn't been retracted. I think it's also massive that other players have come out and retweeted and supported. And I think I can't see any other explanation for it other than it is indicative of the feeling in the dressing room at the minute. And if that's the case, and that's been shared in the media, I do think it's a game changer.
Yeah.
I personally wonder if perhaps they are trying not to look the situation in the eye, and almost like try and ignore it until the start of the season on Saturday, and just hope that it just goes away.
That's what they've been doing with a lot of criticism.
I don't think they've got much choice on this one, probably. I can't see a way out of it, because if they did come out and say, if anything Noble comes out and says now, so if Noble releases a club statement now that says, I was emotional, and upon reflection, it was the wrong thing to do. And if he does come out and say that, people are going to see through that straight away. They're not going to believe any club statement that has Mark Noble's name attached to it if it's got an apology in there. If they were to put something out, I can't see anything other than further criticism. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps the only way out of this particular situation for them is just to bury their head in the sand until this one has kind of not gone away, but until the waves created by this have died down a little bit. Yeah,
walking about like that, Charlie. I can't see it.
Yes,
I can't see it. It's not happening. What do you think?
Cheeky blinkers. That's what it is. I honestly, I think what's going to happen is I think they'll make an exciting signing, be it a winger or a striker or someone who everyone goes, "Oh, hello," and that will quell it to a certain extent. Not in any way, shape, or form completely, because the cat's out of the bag. You can't put it back in a bag. It's not happening. As someone who's tried to move cats from one room to another, I'm telling you now, it's not happening. They out now. But it will quell it to an extent where there will be some people who will sort of be like, well, they've tried to invest money, blah, 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 blah. And it will be that conversation. The conversation will change from everyone being quite vitriolically against them to everyone sort of being against them but willing to potentially give them a chance or whatever, because it's natural. The second you get an exciting signing at the club, everyone goes, yes, come on, right, let's see what they can do. Everyone's waiting to see Jared Bowen do one incredible run against Newcastle, and it's going to go mad. Scenes everywhere. So I do think that will happen at some point during this window, just because they kind of have to. But it's I don't know if I'd say it's in the end game yet, but that's only because I've just always seen 2023 as the end date. That is the end date. Well, I don't think the 1st of January or the first day of the summer transfer window, whichever way it works out, and they're going to be like, whoop, right, we're gone now. But that's when we're going to see the actual full process of them leaving actually unfold. So whether you call it the end game or not, I think we're just there. I just think it's how do I word it? I think it's also good for Mark because he received some criticisms during the restart of being quite negative of some of the things he said on the club website and stuff like that. And some people are like, what? Hang on, you're meant to be the club captain. You can't be saying these things. And it's the most leading by the front you could have possibly done. And it's notable that he was the first person, and then Jack Wilshere and other players felt the need that they could actually follow in his wake, which is good. That's good leadership, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, there's always that adage, of any press is good press, regardless of if people in the media have been slamming it for it. I mean, which is kind of ridiculous to me because why? Like it's the club captain's role to speak up on how he feels the team, are reciprocating a situation. But I think as far as Endgame is concerned, it could potentially, crack the door open for it in the sense of if I'm somebody who's looking at buying a football club, at a team that is recognized around the world, and I see that players of a team are even lashing out at a board, as like that's a bargaining chip right there in its own, because it's not going to stop, especially if A, you don't sign players, B, you keep trying to do things for the cheap, and stuff like this, you could use that as a bargaining chip to either lower the price of the club or do something. But, somebody who, I guess on that same token, as far as Endgame, if somebody does want to come out and get the club before 2023, I think it has to be somebody that makes it known so that their presence even push pressure on the board too, because if you have somebody, let's say, I don't know, somebody who owns like an American football team here, it's like, oh, I want to get into this in England, and they're like, Triple H, perfect example. If he's like, I want to own West Ham, right? And then, shit starts to hit the fan some more, and everybody's, oh, Triple H, we need you, this and that, the other. That's going to put pressure. And then, the media is going to pick up on that because Triple H is not somebody that nobody knows. Everybody knows who Triple H is, what he's done, and that he's a fan. So I think it could lead to a potential start for the end game for sure. Especially, as I said earlier, with the caliber of people who have been retweeting it and talking about it, not just on this team, but past players. So I think he knew what he was doing. And if he comes out and apologizes, like you said, it's just going to be a load of shit. But yeah.
I do think, like, significance-wise as well, what Tommy said about significance is it's massive because when we're all in this bubble, and so we often find it difficult to figure out what is a significance to the outside world as it is to us. Declan Rice is a perfect example. We'll all say Declan Rice is incredible. Not if like Roman Abramovich is in the room, then we'll maybe say it a bit quieter. But we would all talk about how good he is. But then other fans of other teams are like, oh, he just seems he's much for muchness. He's not right, but because we're in the bubble, so we see it all, we hear it all. The most significant thing about the Noble thing for me. My girlfriend asked me why West Ham were training on Twitter. She doesn't care about football. My mum's boyfriend, who does support Man United, but doesn't like follow it like we do. He just checks the BBC Sport website every 2 days or whatever. He was like, I saw Mark Noble tweeted something about the board. Like that's really significant from like an outside perspective. That's huge. Because obviously inside we see it all, but from the outside, if they're seeing it, then that's a big thing.
And even speaking from the outside, West Brom, like some of their fan pages were even putting GSB out as a hashtag. Yeah. Obviously, like they have no reason to not be thrilled about Grady D and Ghana, but the fans that have some sense about him can see that they got him, for peanuts, and they were even saying GSB out. And I think that to follow your point, Charlie, is huge because if other teams start to say that too, then it's not something that just our little bubble gets to experience.
It shines a bit of a light on feeling beyond Hammers United as well, because we will sometimes get quite rightly criticism leveled at us to say, look, you don't represent the entire fan base, and we don't. We don't have the reach that a tweet from Mark Noble does. And someone just put in the comments a minute ago that it got 75,000 likes, and that's so that tells its own story as well in a way that in a way that we, like you say, we can't from our position.
That, I think, is probably a good point to start wrapping things up. I think. Who was it who once said, "Always keep on wanting more"? Guys, thank you very much for coming on the show. Before you do go, Andy, give Hammers United a quick plug.
Okay, guys. So for those of you that don't know, Hammers United is an independent supporters association, fully FSA affiliated. And if you want to sign up, you can go to hammersunited.com and there is a join section on there. Going across the bottom of the screen. Thank you. Our aim is very simple: to improve things for all West Ham United supporters. No more, no less.
Charlie, anything you want to give a quick plug to before we go?
Yeah, Andy's burger choice of condiment. Now, I thought that was a big moment for me. You want to talk about end games and significance? I mean, that was large for me personally. So,
yeah,
shout out Andy and shout out being correct about burgers.
Fantastic, Sally.
I guess there has been a question I've seen pop up multiple times, so I just real quick want to try to answer it from Daniel, who was asked a question about if Haller would turn in a transfer request. I don't see that as being something that would happen right now. I see something as potentially happening next season. You know, if things don't go well, if he has a subpar season, if he gets hurt or whatever, you know, because I think as talented as Haller is, his emotions are on his sleeve, and you can see exactly how he's feeling by how he plays. But if the team isn't doing anything to advance as far as like on the pitch, I wouldn't blame him for putting in a transfer request next season, you know, especially if, you know, because he's one of the players that came out and said he was very much looking forward to getting, you know, service by Diangana, and then 2 days later he's gone, you know. So what kind of support is that from your own board if your biggest signing ever was giving a player a praise and then you ship him out, you know? So stuff. I mean, it's, you know, kind of goes back to the same thing with Payet. You know, Payet was frustrated that we weren't doing anything to improve, and he bounced. You can't blame him for it. I mean, it was kind of shitty in the way that it happened, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, if you're not building around, you know, your talisman, you know, I know Payet was better than Haller, but if you're not building around him, then why would they want to stay?
Indeed. Thanks for all your input, guys. You've been absolutely brilliant. I really haven't had much to say. You've been fantastic. So thank you, Andy. It's been absolutely great having you. Thank you very much for joining us.
I really appreciate it.
Charlie, as ever, as much as you like winding me up, I love having you on. So thank you very much. And Sally, becoming my wingman almost on this show now. So thank you again for coming on.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. Absolutely.
You talk a lot of sense to my nonsense. So thank you. If you have enjoyed this at home, please like and subscribe and all the good stuff on YouTube. And to everybody in the chat, it's been absolutely lit. So thank you very much. And anybody I didn't get to, any comments or questions I didn't put up, I do apologize, but it's been that great in there tonight. I've struggled to keep up. So thank you all, and until next week, come on you Irons.